My name is David Miller. I am 83 years old, and I live in a small house on the outskirts of the town of Fox Hill. An old, peeling facade, a shabby fence through which weeds grow, and silence. This is my kingdom. This is a place I once built myself with my own hands after I returned from the army. My children were born here. Here I buried my Mary, my wife, the love of my life. And now it is just me. I have 2 children, a son, James, and a daughter, Linda. And for grandchildren, whom I once carried on my shoulders, made laugh with stupid jokes and taught to swim in the lake. Once upon a time. Today they mostly think of me when they need something. To borrow money, to leave the children for the day, or when someone is sick and I can substitute. They rarely call. They don't ask, "How are you, Dad?" But, "Can you still come today?" Sometimes I even wait for that call, as if asking for help is all that's left of connecting with them. I've become a burden to them, an invisible burden. Linda never has time, work, kids, life. James is always busy, fixing something, planning something, and I'm just an old man sitting in his kitchen looking out the window where no one passes. An old man who gets passed over in the store because he's slow to pick out bread. Even the saleswoman, that young girl with the colored hair, pretends not to see me. I say hello. She doesn't say anything. I ask for a bag. She throws it on the counter without looking me in the eye. And once she just walked past me when I dropped some change. As if I'm transparent. As if I don't exist. I don't complain. At least I try not to. I've seen a lot worse in my life. But this cold, the indifference of those for whom you lived, bites harder than any winter. Sometimes I sit on a bench near the house and watch people walk by. Young, beautiful, busy. They laugh, talk on the phone, listen to music in their headphones. And me? I am a shadow. Just an echo of the times when my word counted for something. Sometimes I think, maybe I really am worthless anymore? Maybe this indifference is natural? Maybe old age is just the end, where everything falls silent, like the last note in a song that no one listens to anymore? But then I remember who I was, and something inside protests, still quiet, but no longer silent. The real awakening did not happen right away, but the first cracks in my patience had already appeared. And I did not know then that everything would soon change, that the world would see me, and hear me, and maybe even be scared. I was a simple boy, without a wealthy background or special privileges. My childhood was spent on a farm, where every day began before sunrise and ended when the rake in my hand was no longer visible. My father taught me to work honestly. My mother taught me to endure in silence and not to break my word. And when I was 18, I joined the army. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I knew I had to. That was my America. I served in the Marines. I went to Vietnam. I saw death, dirt, pain, and things that I still don't want to remember. But it was there that I learned to keep my back straight, and to respect people not for their words, but for their actions. When I returned, I was different, not embittered, wiser. And then I met Mary. She sold newspapers on the corner of Main Street. At first glance, quiet, modest, but the kind with fire in her eyes. I fell in love without a memory. We got married 6 months later. We built our lives from scratch. At first I worked in construction, then I opened a small roofing company. That's when my story began, which was respected in the city. I wasn't a millionaire, but my word counted. I paid people decently, helped veterans, donated to the school. And when Mary got sick, I left everything to be with her. She left quietly at night, and I was left with 2 children, 8-year-old Linda and 3-year-old James. Lonely, broken, but I didn't give up. I raised them as best I could. Not perfectly, but with love. I cooked breakfasts, took them to clubs, worked in the evenings. All for their sake. So that they wouldn't feel a lack of love. So that they wouldn't be ashamed. So that they knew, Dad is reliable. I was everything to them, and I never complained. I was respected in the city. Even when I got older, they still asked me for advice. I helped out at the local library. I participated in community meetings. And now those same people walk by and look right through me. as if I'm no longer David Miller, just a grandfather slowly fading from the stage. And that's the worst part, the contrast between who I was and how I'm treated now. But I haven't said the last word yet. It was an ordinary day. A gray cloud hung over the city. A slow wind swayed the branches of old trees, and everything looked as if life itself had fallen asleep. I was walking home from the pharmacy, holding a package of blood pressure medication in my hands. I stopped at the pedestrian crossing, because the traffic light was still red. A woman was standing nearby, about 30, in a business suit, with a phone to her ear and a coffee in her other hand. She looked preoccupied. When the light turned green, I started. But in the middle of the road, my heart suddenly contracted. My breathing stopped. I stopped, bent over, almost fell. The package of medication slipped out of my hands. People were walking by. Some looked around, but did not stop. And then I looked up and saw her, the same woman. I looked at her pleadingly and said, "Excuse me, can I hold your hand? I feel sick." She took a step back, as if I were a leper. She glared at me over the phone in disgust and said loudly, "Don't touch me. Someone, please help this old man." But no one came over. Everyone just stared. One even took out his phone and started filming. I stood there, holding onto the lantern, and something inside me crunched, like a branch under the weight of snow. When I finally got home, my whole body was shaking. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the medicine on the table, and I felt that something had changed. Something definitive. I was no longer just disappointed. I was angry, and not because of the woman or the crowd, but because of everything. Because of years of silence. Because of years of sacrifice that turned into indifference. Because of the children who couldn't hear me. Because of the grandchildren to whom I had become an unfunny grandfather. Because of the doctor, the salesman, the passerby. Because of myself who had allowed contempt to become a habit. I stood up, slowly but surely. I walked to the mirror. I looked at myself. There was more than just an old man. There was David Miller, a man who had built, nurtured, protected, and who had been destroyed by indifference. But not completely. That night I didn't sleep. I wrote. For the first time in many years, I took out my old diary, the same one in which I had once jotted down memories of my service. I began with the phrase, "I will not be ignored again." First they were just thoughts, then plans. Not revenge in its crudest form. No, I didn't mean to hurt. I wanted them to see, for everyone to see who I was, and that even in my old age I was a force. In the morning I called my old comrade, Jack Riley. We had served together. He was now the head of the Veterans Organization. I told him everything. He was silent. And then he said, "It's time to remind these young men who David Miller is." That day was the beginning of change. I was no longer going to remain silent. I was no longer going to allow myself to be treated like trash. I am not a remnant. I am an experience. I am history. I am a living person. And let the world feel it. On the third day after that incident at the crossing, I sat down to write again. But this time there was no regret in it. It was clear. Action plan. Stage 1. I divided the sheet in half. On the left, the name, on the right, the debt. Not in money, no. In attention, in respect, in the memory of who I was and am. James, Linda, Sally, Dr. Harris, the store clerk, the girl on the street. All those who had devalued me. I had no intention of taking revenge as an enemy. I wanted them to learn to see, and to learn. The first step was to send a letter to my grandchildren. But not an electronic one. On paper. By hand. Each one was not a complaint, but a story. One letter was about how I carried their father out of the flames during a garage fire. The other was about how I spent the night at Linda's bedside when she had pneumonia as a child. I reminded her. I gave them back their memory. Because without it, they were just strangers with the same last name. Then I turned to the local radio station. I knew that Jack still had acquaintances. A week later, I was standing in the studio giving interviews about the problems of aging, indifference, and how people lose touch with the past. They listened to me, strangely enough. But I could see that the host was not pretending to be respectful. There was genuine attention in his eyes. I was not talking about myself. I was talking for everyone who had been written off. And it worked. After the broadcast, I received a letter from the local school. The history teacher invited me to speak to the students. I came, in a suit with military medals with a diary in my hands. And there, in the classroom where those who could become Sally were sitting, for the first time in a long time, I felt that I was being listened to. I did not ask for respect. I radiated it. Meanwhile, I changed my behavior in my family. When James called and asked if I could watch the little one, I said, "No, I have plans." He was silent. Then I asked again. I repeated. And I added, "I'm not the one who just waits anymore." Linda arrived without warning. I didn't open it. And later I sent her the same letter I sent to my grandchildren. The reaction wasn't immediate, but it was. For the first time in months, she called herself. She asked how I was feeling. She didn't ask. She asked. The diary filled up. At first like a revenge diary. Then like a chronicle of transformation. I began to remember myself. I began to remember the things that had made me who I am. Not just for others, for myself. I made breakfasts for myself again, not out of duty, but out of love. I read, wrote, planned. I was a strategist again. I wasn't fighting. I was teaching. Each step is slow, steady, precise. And each is proof that old age is not a sentence. This is a new mission. I didn't scream. I acted. And my silence became louder than all the accusations. I am David Miller, and I am turning myself back. Today I am sitting again on the same bench near the house. The sun is setting behind the roof of the old school. The air smells of autumn, and in my hands is the same diary. But now it is not about pain. It is about the path. My path. Through the shadow, through the silence, through the anger, to the light. To myself. They are no longer afraid to forget me. Not because I did something loud, but because I reminded I am. I exist. And my story matters. They listen to me again. They respect me. And even they wait for me. At school, I am now invited as a mentor. In the veterans organization, I lead the group, the Word of the Elder. Linda calls every week. James comes not to ask, but to talk. And Sally? She wrote me a letter. Paper one. For the first time. In it, an apology. And the question, "Grandpa, could you tell me about Vietnam?" I learned to respect myself again. And with it, I taught them too. Not by shouting, but by memory. Because old age is not fading. It is the revelation of the depths. This is not a time for silence, but a time for wisdom. I realized, you are not devalued until you yourself begin to believe it. We ourselves give the signal whether we should be listened to or whether we can pass by. And if we are silent, then the world decides that we have nothing to say. Old age is not age. It is a state of mind. I have seen people who are 30, but they are already old. And I have seen 80-year-olds who have a fire in their hearts. And most importantly, this fire is ignited not by the attention of others, but from within. So, if you are reading this and you are hurting from indifference, from silence, from oblivion, do not give up. Do not be silent. Speak. And most importantly, remember who you were, because the one who remembers himself will always be alive. And if I have to leave the world with one phrase, let it be this: never let others determine your worth. You carry it in your heart. David Miller.